With this, I'm going to start with an image that I took a while ago, but I absolutely love it, and it gives a good illustration of why HDR is important. Here you can see I have an image in this abandoned warehouse out in back when I was living on the East Coast in Boston. This was in, I think it was in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And I loved it because, I love how slick the water looks. The roof or the ceilings here were not very tight, and so it was raining a bunch, and the water dripped from the roof all the way through. We were about 2 floors below the roof, and you can see the puddle here. But I loved it. As soon as I walked by it and I saw this, it looked like an oil slick. I kind of composed my shot. This was taken with, I think, my 17mm tilt shift lens. Yeah, you can see right here the Canon 17mm tilt shift lens, and gave me a nice kind of wide perspective. But the problem is that you lose a lot of that dynamic range in the highlights and in the shadows because the camera can't capture all of that information at once. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just really quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I'm going to take these brackets that you can see here. What brackets are basically they're exposures that change based on shutter speed intervals. So you can see that this shutter speed here, if we look over at the EXIF information, was 1/500th of a second, and it got all of the brightest parts of the image. So you can actually see through the windows and see the building behind it. And as we increase, you can see that it cuts it by one stop. So 1/250th, 1/125th, 1/60th, and so on and so forth. Now, those are for the shadows. Now watch, those are for the highlights. Now we're getting shadow detail. So we're getting the dark parts of the images exposed properly. And so now what I want to do is take all of that juicy information and combine them into one exposure. We do that with a method called tone mapping. And what tone mapping does is it goes through all of the exposures that you feed into the tone mapping algorithm, in this case Photomatix, and it goes pixel by pixel across every image that you feed it to determine the best exposure for them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this by going to File, Plug in Extras, and Export to Photomatix Pro. In this case, I'm going to tone map in Photomatix. I'm not going to tone map in Lightroom, and then I'm just going to hit Export. What will happen is Lightroom will send those images over, and you'll start to see Photomatix start doing its thing. All right, let me just fit the screen. And you can see that we have a really good exposure here right off the bat. Everything is looking really good, but there are a few things I'm going to do. Like, for instance, here, actually what I'll do is I'll hit default. For this first image, we'll hit default. Default was right over here. Let me move the histogram down below. You see it says here reset default. It basically takes all of the sliders and resets them to what HDR Soft, the manufacturer of Photomatix, what they think the default settings should be. For this type of grungy urbex scene, what I usually do for the strength is I bring that up to 100%. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust my black and white points. Right here you can see that we have on our histogram, we're bunching up a bit in the highlights, and I can see in the bright areas here that we're blowing out the highlights. And that's because the white point is too high. So I'm going to drop that down, and right off the bat I can see that I've fixed that. The highlights look clean right now. I'm going to bring up the black point a bit, and now I'm going to start adjusting luminosity and detail contrast. So luminosity is going to bring out some shadow detail. Detail contrast is going to add a little bit of kind of a texture boost to the local contrast. So it adds a little bit of edginess to the shot. And then finally, gamma. Gamma is going to be the overall brightness of the scene. So I usually like to make my image a little bit brighter than normal. And the reason for that is when we go into perfect effects, a lot of the effects here will darken the image. So Chris just asked a question. Chris asked, what do I mean by the whites looking clean? It's a good question. So Chris, look over here in the sky. The sky was overcast this day, so it was a gray. Now, the default white point value for that Photomatix gives is 0.25%. So right there. So you can see that the whites over here are too white. It's actually blowing out the highlights. You're losing information. And so I know that that's the case because of how strong that white point is. So what I did was I brought it down, and I can see now that the whites become what I consider to be clean, meaning they're correct, they're accurate. That's basically what I mean. It's a good question, though. John asks a good question. John's asking if your camera only does 3 brackets at 2-stop intervals. Can you explain how to use your exposure compensation to get 7 or 9? It's hard, John, to do that because explaining that requires me to show you the camera. It'd be most effective if I can hold the camera and show you. There are ways to do that with your camera to kind of create presets, like using the custom functions, depending on, I assume because you're saying 3 bracket shots, you're a Canon user. But there are ways to, depending on the camera, to use the custom functions. All right, so here I've got my image. I might make it even a little bit brighter. And I'm going to hit Save and Re-import so that we can go back into Lightroom with the tone mapped image. Ah, it's a Sony, so I was wrong. See what happens when you assume? All right, so let's do this really quickly. What I want to do is I'm going to compare the 2 images I showed you. I think I showed you this one. So let's take this one and compare it with that one so we can see the differences. All right, so right off the bat, what I want to illustrate here is what tone mapping gives you. You can see all the details here. You can basically see the building through the window, which over here you see no details. You can also see the detail of the actual windows themselves. If we zoom in, you can actually see that information. You can also see the information in the brick that we couldn't get before. And you can see all of the information on the ground. So you see all the edges of the water on the surface, which to me is very important. All right, so let's go here and we'll actually start stylizing. Before we do, there's actually, John, this is a good point. My buddy Hank gave a great idea. In situations where your camera can only bracket 3 brackets or 3 exposures, you can always, if your camera has a manual mode, meaning it allows you to control the aperture and shutter speed, you can always just adjust the shutter speed manually. So what I mean by that is I could have stood here, I could have stood here and keyed in 1/500th of a second, 1/250th, 1/125th, and so on, and gotten the exposures manually. And yeah, Hank, I am on a tripod. Absolutely. I always shoot on a tripod. My tripod goes with me everywhere. My tripod, to me, is just as important as my camera. So, and of course, leave the aperture alone. Correct. Yeah, Rachel, or you can get a remote control. Which I'll bring up the remote control at the end of the webinar. So, what I'm going to do here, hey, Damien. Damien says f4 seems large for focal length with the distance. Was it a creative choice? Yes, absolutely. So Damien's basically saying that f4 didn't give me as deep of a depth of field, perhaps, as someone would want. I intentionally I opened up wide open at f4 because, and I'll actually show you why through the stylization. All right, so let's go to File, Plug in Extras, and I'm going to send the image to the Perfect Photo Suite. So, and Damien, I'll trust me, there's a method to this. All right, so here we're in Perfect Photo Suite, and now we're going to stylize. I'm going to go to Perfect Effects first because that's where I do all of my primary stylizations. And a lot of times when I go to Perfect Effects, I look at the subject here. So my stylization is contingent on what it is the image contains. So for me here, this is a grungy scene. For a scene like this where the quality of light is crap, meaning it's just this kind of boring flat light, I pretty much always go to the movie looks category, and an effect here that I love is called Urban Sickness. And the reason why I do that is because it gives me these undertones where it changes the color of the highlights and it transfers through to the reflection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that to 0, and I'm just going to use a little bit of it, about halfway, just so that it starts to come through. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm also going to invert it. So I really only wanted to apply to the windows and to the highlights. So I'm going to take my masking brush, I'm going to hit the inspector, and I'm going to hit invert. With that, I'm going to start painting the windows. So what I'm doing is the invert button hid the effect, and it put the brush into a painted mode, which allows me to, and notice how I'm not too careful around the edges. and I'll explain why. The effects that I'm going to stack on top of this will kind of cover any of those edges, so I'm not too worried about it. So I'm just kind of going here, and I'm trying to take, I want to get as much of the window itself. I don't care about the frame, whether it's getting masked, but I do want to get all of the light from the window. It'll all make sense, trust me. So I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to start painting on the highlights, because you want, the highlights have reflections. Or rather, the reflections here have highlights. Reversed it in my brain. Oops, that's no good. I'm going to get a small brush here, just kind of get that there, and do this. And it's important that you do that. If you're going to do this kind of masking where you invert the mask and paint in, you want to make sure that you take stock of where the effect appears in your entire image. So because the water is reflecting the actual light here, I want to make it representative. I hope that makes sense. So I'm just going to go here. And notice how I'm only masking the reflections of the window. I'm not masking in the areas where there is no highlight reflection. And it's stuff like this that essentially helps you really kind of let your work stand out from the rest of, people out there. Because most people just apply effects they just do blanket effects and they move on. Here, this shows a lot of methodology. And it's something that I look forward to doing whenever I edit my images. So you can see here what we've done is, and I can bring up the mask here just to make sure that I've got everything. And it looks good. Let me get these corners right here. How do I adjust my brush so quickly? Hey, Jake. So there are two controls for the brush. The first control is the brush size. On the keyboard, you can use the left and right brackets. So right bracket makes the brush larger, left makes it smaller. And then you see the two circles. The distance in between the inner circle and the outer circle is the feather. And basically what the feather does is it controls the transition or the fall off. You can change that by hitting Shift left and right brackets. So Shift left bracket makes a smaller feather. Shift right gives you a larger feather. So that is what I was basically doing. And now I'm going to hide the mask by going to Show Mask and going to None. All right, so here what I'm going to do is hit Add, which will create a new empty layer. And I'm going to go to the left and apply an effect called Blue Dawn. Now with Blue Dawn, I'm going to bring the strength down to 0, bring it up a bit, and then go to the blending options. The blending options allows me to control how the effect blends. So I'm going to drop down, and I'm going to start with multiply, soft light and hard light. I actually like multiply. I'm going to bring that the strength up more. And you can see now what we're getting. We're getting that kind of grungy look. I'm going to hit Add. And now what I'm going to do is hit Add again. I'm going to keep that global. The next thing I'm going to do is apply, my tonal contrast. So under color and tone, I want to add some texture to the image, and there's an effect called tonal contrast. Again, it's under the color and tone category. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring out some of the shadow details. You can see when you apply tonal contrast, there's a shadow slider. And if I bring that up, the shadows come out. Now, this effect is too strong at 100%. It's really important that you take this effect in small doses. So I bring it to 0, and I only want about, I'll stop right around here, just almost at 30%. The next thing I'm going to do is hit Add, and usually with tonal contrast, one of the effects I like to apply is a glow. So in this case here, I'm going to start with a grunge glow and see how that works. Works perfectly here. I'm going to bring it to 0, just bring it up just a bit. All right. So now I'm done. I've got the stylization. You can see here, let's hide the effects bar. Right over here, there's a little black square. Click it and it hides the effects bar and you get a larger preview. Now, if you hit Command P on a Mac or Control P on a PC, you'll get the before and the after. So look at the major change, what we started with and what we kind of stylized with. It's pretty cool. Hank is saying, starting to lose brick. Oh yeah, should have. But what I want to do here is actually, this goes back to Damien with the why I shot at f4. The reason why I shot at f4 is because I knew that this foreground was going to be my focal point. So to that point, what I'm going to do is right from Perfect Effects, I'm going to click on Focus from the module selector. This is going to send me into focal point. I'm going to reset everything here, and you can see here's my focus bug. By default, the bug is round. You can see it's round because the body of the bug is a circle. On the top right here, you'll see the focus bug palette. I'm going to actually close everything so it'll make it a little bit easier to see where I'm going. Oops. Let me close these palettes here. So the top palette is focus bug. Under the focus bug palette, there's a shape drop down. I'm going to go from round to planar. And I'm going to put this planar bug, which you can see now is a square. I'm going to manipulate it so that it's horizontal. And I'm going to bring it down to the foreground. Now, you might be thinking, all right, well, that's great, Brian. You just ruined your image. And that's because, you know, a lot of people, they don't really, you really want to understand the subtleties of focal point. Focal point is pretty amazing when you use it in small amounts. So what I mean by that is you can see how strong the blur is. We're going to need to adjust that. But the first thing I want to do is I want to change the tilt of the plane of focus. Right now, when I click here, you see how the plane of focus is vertical, meaning it's perpendicular. The floor itself is going, you know, in to out, but my plane of focus is going straight up and down, and I want to change that. So I can change that by putting the cursor inside the body of the bug. So right here, here's my cursor, here's the body. I'm going to press the Option key on the Mac, or if you're on Windows, you'll press the Alt key. Press and hold it. Don't just press it. Press and hold, and then drag upward. And that's going to tilt my plane of focus. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust it so that the top part of the focus bug is right around the edge, right around the corner. Now, two things I'm going to do first. On the right here, I'm going to go to the focus brush, and I'm going to show the mask. And this shows me what's in focus and what's out of focus. You can see that everything that's black is in focus, but we have this area here that's out of focus, which I don't want. I want that to be totally in focus. I'm going to take the focus brush, which is this icon right down here. I'm going to make my brush size larger. I'm going to make sure that I'm set to paint focus at 100%, and I'm just going to turn this pure black. Now with that done, I'm going to hide the mask, and you can see that our foreground is now out of focus, or is in focus. Now, we're going to go to the blur over here, and I'm going to drop that down. You remember how I mentioned that the key to focal point is the subtlety? The default setting, or the default amount of blur in focal point is 30%, which is way too much. But watch, when we drop that down like significantly to about 15%, you start to get this kind of nice depth, the shallow depth of field. And so Damien, this kind of circles back. The reason why I shot it at f4 is because I really didn't want much of the detail. I wanted these windows to be kind of an afterthought. I didn't want them to be in detail because, watch, if I turn the preview off down here, there's just too much detail. All these lines over here are taking away from what I feel is the main kind of role in the shot, and that's the reflection, the kind of oily slick, which is why, if you remember, it's why I took the shot to begin with. So by adding a little bit of blur, we're mitigating that. I'm actually going to increase the amount of blur a little bit. And now what I'm also going to do is under the Options palette, which is right here, you have a brightness and contrast slider. What this does is it'll control how bright or how dark the out of focus is. The out of focus area is, I should say. So I'm going to drop that brightness down. You can see how the background is getting darker. I'm also going to increase the contrast. And so now you should start to see that your eyes are actually going really towards the center. To that point, I'm also going to add a little bit of a vignette, which is essentially just burning edges. I'm going to deselect this checkbox. You see this checkbox that says vignette follows focus bug? I don't want that. I want the edges to burn equally. So I'm going to drop that, and I'm going to add a little bit of an edge darkening, and I'm going to bring it closer to the midpoint. So now you get this really kind of close to the center focus. I'll hit apply. And there we go. Thanks, Damien. Yeah, I knew you'd like that. And so here's our shot. So let's kind of go really quickly. I'm going to start at the beginning. You can see here, this is our tone mapped image. So a point I forgot to make about tone mapping, and I make this usually in every webinar that's HDR centric. Tone mapping, meaning the process of bringing out the best pixels for your exposure, is a utility. I was actually just having this conversation with some coworkers here at the office. Tone mapping and HDR, this is not a style. It should not be a style. It is a utility. It is a process for which you can get the proper baseline image. Here, this is a good baseline. This has all information. It has shadow detail, it has highlight detail, and it has midtones. Nothing is lost. Now what you can do is you can go and stylize. So now you can stylize. So here we use perfect effects. We got to look to the image, and then we use focal point to really draw the eye to the center. And then we'll hit save, and we bring that image back into Lightroom. And there's our image. So from here, one of the things that I usually like to do is I'll go to the develop module because we're not done yet. This is kind of a tricky thing to wrap your head around, I think. The first thing I like to do is make sure that I have kind of proper points. And so the way I do that is these 4 sliders in Lightroom 4, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. You can actually see the proper points of them. The way you do that is you have to press and hold the Option key on the Mac or the Alt key on a PC. When I do that, so again, I'm pressing and holding on the Option key. If I go to the highlights, you see a black screen. Now watch what happens as I start dragging the highlights to the right. You start seeing these kind of points. That is information that is now being lost. We're actually losing highlight. So what I do is I drag the slider until right before the first dots start. So that's my proper highlight area. Same thing with the shadows. With the shadows, you see that blue on the right over there and on the bottom? I'm going to increase shadows just a bit until I remove that information. Same thing with the white point. The white point, our default white point, is too bright. You can see those 4 little yellow dots. I'm going to bring the white point down to the left, and the black point. Black point's looking pretty good. I'll bring it up just a bit. And here is our kind of properly exposed image. I'm going to increase the contrast a bit, increase the clarity, and then increase a little bit of the vibrance to let the colors pop. And so this is our image. This is my finalized image. I'm ready to go. And I really love what I did here. What were those keys again, Jake? So, Jake, the 4 sliders right here, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. If you're on a Mac, just press and hold the Option key. If you're on a PC, it's the Alt key. So if you and the way you know you're doing it correctly, you see the word tone right here. When you press and hold the Option or Alt key, it changes to reset tone. If you are holding it and you see reset tone, when you drag these sliders, they will automatically turn black or white. At what point would I crop my image, Keith? Great question. I crop my image at the very end. So okay, it's a great question. When would I crop my image? I usually crop at the very end. So let's say here I want to tighten this up. Let's say I want to bring the top of the frame closer to the top of the window. I'd go to the crop tool in the Lightroom. I usually crop with my aspect ratio constrained or locked. I'll drop down. So here you see how I'm bringing the frame a little bit tighter. I'll turn it off. Now, here's what I always do after that. I go to the grid, because now, watch, if I go from here to this image, the crop doesn't match. And I want it to match. I want all of my images to match. So what I do is I take this image, I start highlighting all the other ones, and I go to on the this panel here, on the bottom, there's a button called Sync Settings. I go to Sync Settings, and I already have it selected. I sync the crop. When I hit Synchronize, all the other images now will match. So I can go here, and you can see how everything is exactly the same. So that's what I do. Do I ever do tone editing, color balancing? Great question, Damien. Damien's asking if I ever do any tone editing, color balancing, sharpening, noise reduction prior to tone mapping. So basically what Damien's asking is on these images here, my raw brackets, do I do anything? The only thing I would do is correct white balance if it needed it. I don't. If you adjust anything else, Damien, you're defeating the purpose of getting your brackets because you're going to adjust the initial exposure value information. So I don't do anything. I don't adjust contrast. I don't adjust brightness. I don't adjust anything. The only thing I do is adjust the white balance. If it's, and usually I adjust white balance for more of the nature shots. If it's off. Usually interior shots like this, I'm changing the color so dramatically that white balance is tossed out the window to begin with. We've got Hawkeye Steve over here who's saying the metadata shows today's date. The reason for that, and actually today's 7-Eleven, so I think all 7-Elevens in the US are giving away free Slurpees. But that's neither here nor there. That's because I imported these photos into a new Lightroom catalog for today's webinar. So, but you can see the original date, April 23rd, 2011. So last year. But man, Steve, you got Hawkeyes. And thank you for that. Topher's digging the Slurpee information. Yeah, I'm going to try after this webinar. I'm going to head out and see if I can get a Slurpee. But yeah, I read it online today, free Slurpees, because it's their birthday. All right, so let's move on to another image. I think I have enough time for another image here. So let me bring out my thing here. Image 2. All right, so image 2 is a shot I took after Photoshop World Vegas last year. I went, I think it was, let me see. Yeah, September 10th, 2011. We went to Nelson, Nevada, which is a ghost town. You basically can go there. It's about maybe an hour or so away from Vegas itself. And you can pay to basically get access to this ghost town, and there's tons of cool stuff to shoot. Now, as you can see, this image has a gross amount of dynamic range. There is a ton of dynamic range. Watch, let's go to the highlight, or to, this exposes for the bright parts, so the sky itself, and then we start getting mid-tone information. But then look at all the shadow information that's just not there. So as we start exposing, we start getting the shadow information. We get the wheel well, and rather the footwell, and all the detail in the springs and on the door. So that's all information that I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these images and I'm going to send them over to Photomatics just like we did before. Now, I saw Don and a few other people asked if I use any other products like HDR Pro 2, which Nick just released. I haven't used HDR Pro 2 much since the beta. I was on their private beta and I played around with it, but I haven't. Oops, I sent this to Perfect Photo Suite. That's not what I wanted to do. Let me get out of here. But I haven't played around with it much. I find that Photomatics does a good job for me. But I will be playing around with HDR Pro 2. So don't take it that one product is better than the other. You need to figure it out for yourselves. I always say this. Every company that makes an HDR product, a tone mapping product, has a 30-day trial. Download them all, play around with them, see which ones you like the best. For me, Photomatics does the job, so I'm going to go, and that's why I'm using it. So I'm going to go send this out and get it going. One that Steven's asking about, or I'm sorry, I think it's Stefan, was asking about the Photoshop's HDR. I was never a fan of it. I know people who love it. I don't care for it. So look at this. You can see right off the bat, nice even exposure. If you look at the histogram right here, that right there is a beautiful histogram. No loss in shadows, no loss in highlights. All of our mid-tone information is there. Looking good. Here, I might just keep the stock values. I might bring it up just a bit though. That's looking pretty good. I might drop the luminosity a bit. There, that's looking good. I'll hit save and re-import. And again, let's compare. I always like to do this. Let's compare this image with this image. All right, so this is more for, the reason why I do this is because this is targeted more for the HDR haters. And it's something that the reason why I do it is because I want to kind of empower this information with you if you're getting flack from people who are saying that HDR is the devil and that you should be, put on a cross. HDR, and it kind of reinforces what I said earlier about HDR not being a stylization. It is a utility. This information here is important to me. All of that information there is important to me. I'll restore. Now, yeah, we lost the shadows. Like, these are natural shadows. We can bring that back. But I want this information there. You know, we have more information in the clouds. We have more information even in between the door jamb. Right here, that's a total loss of information. Why? I retained all the sharpness. I retained all of the same exact information. I even retained the dust spots that I have up there, which I'm going to fix right now. But what's wrong with this? The problem that people have, I think, that a lot of photographers take umbrage with is, one, they feel threatened by it, and two, and this is valid, a lot of times you'll see HDR that's just not well done. It's overcooked. And that is a problem. But when used properly, HDR has tons of merit. And I really disagree with anyone who says that HDR is not, you know, it doesn't have a place. All right. Barbara asks a really good question, and I'm going to go right to the grid view here. So what Barbara's asking is, where did the question go? How do you determine? Oh, and actually, Don, well said. Don simply wrote, "Art can never be wrong." That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. I mean, everyone has their opinion, and art is not a objective medium. It is a subjective medium, which means there is no right or wrong. There's simply what you like and what you don't like. And I guarantee you, even though I said that, you know, overcooked HDRs are bad, I guarantee you there are people who would probably spend good money on it because it appeals to their sensibilities. So Barbara's question, how do you determine how many exposures you need to make a good HDR image? Barbara, that's a great question, and it's unfortunately something that doesn't have a definitive answer. The reason why I've got 9 exposures here, if you don't count this one, or 7 exposures, is because that's the automated frequency that my camera or my tool shoots at. What the correct answer to how many exposures you need is as many exposures as it takes to get you all of the information in the brightest parts of your image, the darkest parts of your image, and in between. So I have shots over here that have, this right here is normally pretty damn bright. But I also have shots over here that have the darkest parts exposed. Nothing here in the shadow area is lost. I have all shadow detail. And then I have stuff in between, like here. How far into the highlights and the shadows, Hank? That's, it depends. You know, that's a great question. Let's say you were shooting into a tunnel, all right? Let's say you were shooting into a tunnel that you did not see the end of the tunnel, meaning the tunnel just went beyond. There will be, at the vanishing point, depending on how dark the tunnel is, will be a point where there will simply be no light. There will just be a black area. It would be foolish to try to expose for that because there's nothing there. So what I say to that, Hank, is here, when I looked at, and I always review the brackets before I move my camera. When I saw this exposure, one, I looked at the histogram on my camera. So I saw that I have tons of that information. You can see all the shadow details are spread across the entire image. But two, just by looking at the image, I can see that I was happy with what details I got. The same thing went for the highlight exposure. I could see that I have the highlight information, so I'm happy. And then I knew that I would have stuff in between. So that's kind of my answer to that. Jim has a good question. How well does processing a raw image with various exposures work for creating HDR? Are you talking, Jim, about, and actually it kind of goes into what John and Chris are asking about shooting JPEGs. Shooting raw, this image here, I could see I can see, I'm trained enough to know how much better this image would look if I used the RAW, my 14-bit RAW images, as opposed to JPEG. The reason why I'm using JPEG here, everyone, I converted the RAWs to JPEG is because of the webinar. It would take a lot longer to tone map an image using RAW than it does JPEG, and I don't want to waste time. I know that the results that the JPEG gives me is more than sufficient to illustrate what I want to show you. And yeah, John, I am using a 5D Mark III. So let's go here, and I'm going to send this image over to the suite so we can stylize. We'll go to Perfect Photo Suite here. Actually, scratch that. I'm going to show you a different way. I have an idea here. We're going to do something on the fly. All right, back here, take the image. We're going to send it to Photoshop. So Photo, Edit in, Photoshop CS6. And this will work in CS5 as well. You don't need CS6. Well, the first thing we will do is we will go into Perfect Effects. Let's go stylize here, but I want to show you something pretty cool. All right, go File, Automate, Perfect Effects. I'll do a quick stylization here because I want to show you my trick. I know right off the bat, movie looks, thermopylae. If it's a desert scene, I'm probably going to use thermopylae on it, just because I love what it does to the image. I'll bring it down, bring it up a bit, and then I'm going to go to the blending mode. Now with the blending mode, I'm going to cycle through, multiply, soft light, hard light. I like soft light. Bring up the strength. Now what we did here is we're kind of adding some nice contrast to the image. I'm going to hit add, and I'm going to add thermopylae again, except I'm not going to blend it. I'm just going to use the normal blending mode here. So I'm going to bring it to 0 and just bring it up. And it really adds a nice, interesting look to the image. I'll hit add. I'm going to go to the glow category. Actually, first I'll go to tonal contrast. I'm not going to do much else in terms of stylization here. Go to tonal contrast. Love what it does to the image. I'm going to bring back down a bit. Bring up the shadows just a bit. And you can see here, now we're getting more of a natural shadow. But we still have all the detail in the footwell, in the springs. So it's looking good. And then I'll hit add. And now I'll go to the glow. And I might do something like, let me see how Hollywood Glow looks. Hollywood Glow looks awesome. I'm going to go to the blending options. I'm going to bring, let's see, multiply, soft light. Let me see hard light. Soft light it is. Bring it to 0. Just bring it up, and that adds nice richness to the scene. All right. When do I apply noise reduction? I really don't, Paul. I shoot with a 5D Mark III, and I usually shoot at ISO 100, so I never really have any noise. Even at ISO 800, I don't have noise, so I don't really do it. But the question, when? I would apply noise reduction probably at the tone mapped image. It's a case-by-case basis. All right, so I'm done stylizing here. You can see the before and the after, Command P. Before, after. Radical change. We'll hit apply. It's going to bring us back into Photoshop. And the first thing I'll do now is I'm going to take my Content Aware Healing brush and I'm going to start kind of removing some distractions like that shadow there. I'm also going to remove this rod that was bothering me. Ooh, that's awful. Let me make that smaller. Usually it does a really good job. Let me try this, a smaller brush. Wow, that is really bad. All right, let's try something else. I'm going to take the lasso tool, make a selection around this, hit Shift Delete, and use a Content Aware Fill. Man, it does not like that. All right, I'm not going to touch it. I'll just leave that alone. Use that. Oh, you know what? No, I'll just use a clone stamp. There's so much pattern here that, there we go. See? It's always got to know the tools you've got at your disposal. All right, that's gone. Looks good. And then I'll just take this, and let me see if I can get rid of this rock. Something is up with, oh, that's better. I've never seen the Content Aware do something that drastic before. All right, here's what we're going to have some, oh, actually, let me heal these two spots. They're driving me crazy. All right. I'm going to take my quick selection brush. It's the fourth icon in the tool wheel in Photoshop. And I'm going to make a selection around the car. So pretty much the entire car is selected. Let me get the inside here. Okay. And then let me refine the selection here. So I'm going to basically I want the selection to go kind of towards the edge of the car. Oops. And so all I'm doing here is I'm just kind of, again, just refining the selection. So only the car and the inside of the car are there. All right, with that done, that's looking good, good. I'm going to deselect the outside through the window. So literally, and I'm not going to spend too, if I was at home and I was doing this for myself, I would probably be zooming in and spending a lot more time, but I don't want to spend a lot of time because I want to show you this. It's I think it'll work pretty cool. And then let me just kind of get rid of that. So I'm trying to get rid of as much of that as possible. And it'll all make sense in a minute. Okay, and then right there, and right there. All right. I'm pretty satisfied with this, okay? Now, here's the thing. Let me actually get the little bit of the hood ornament. All right, watch what happens if I send this image over to focal point. File, automate, focal point. What will happen is its focal point will work on only what's selected. So you can see here how the car is selected. Let me reset this, which I don't want. Watch what happens if what I want is I want to be able to blur everything but the car. So if I cancel out, with the selection still made, I'm going to go to select and inverse. So now everything but the car is selected, which means that everything but the car will get blurred. And now while I'm at it, I'm going to kind of refine the selection there. There we go. That's good. That's good. That's good. Now here's one of the things that I like to do with this kind of a thing. I like to save channels. So a channel is basically the selection here. So if you go to the channels tab, if you don't see it, just go to Window and select Channels. There's an icon at the very bottom. It looks like a rectangle with a circle punched through it. That saves your selection. So that's just good in case anything ever happens. Now, when I go to File, Automate, Focal Point, the entire car will be totally in focus no matter what. But you can see it looks awful, right? Not a problem. We're going to change the shape of the bug from round to planar. I'm going to make the bug again horizontal, and I'm going to put it on the foreground. And like before, I'm going to tilt it by putting the cursor inside the body of the bug and tilting forward. And while the cursor was in the body of the bug, I hit the Option key or the Alt key. Now I'm going to drop that amount of blur. I don't want that much. Here's no blur. I'm just going to add the tiniest amount of blur. Just a tiny amount. I'm also going to darken the background, increase the contrast. Now you can see that we've got some rough edges here, and that's because of the selection. Again, had I had more time, I would have spent the time here, but what you can do is you can take the focus brush down here at the bottom, set the mode from paint focus to paint blur, and bring that down to about 9 or 10% with a small brush, and just start brushing there, and you can see how you blend that in. So I'm essentially blending the blur in, so now it matches. Same thing with the hood ornament here. And then I'm going to go to focus at 100% because this right here, this little bit is not that needs to be in focus. There we go. And then the entire bottom of the frame needs to be in focus. There we go. So you kind of see this three-dimensional shape coming out of it. And again, you can kind of refine this, but that's what I want to show you with using selections in Photoshop with focal point, is that focal point will honor any selections you make. So it's a cool little thing there. Where do we see the mask again, Hank? Under the focus brush, palette, the second button is called Show Mask, and that shows your mask right there. And so that's kind of one of the cool things. So you can hit apply here. Now again, illustrative purposes only. I'm not totally happy with this. I would, again, spend a lot more time making the edges a lot cleaner. But to give you an idea, it's just a little tiny little boost. You know, instead of having everything in focus, you kind of give your image a little bit more depth. It gives the image a three-dimensional quality here.